Good morning. Welcome and thank you for joining us today from around the world for our panel, Beijing+30, Advancing Women's Legal Rights. My name is Stephen Richman, the American Bar Association's representative to the United Nations, along with my colleague, Renee Doppler, who's our Deputy UN representative, and our team of representatives and observers to the UN. We again welcome and thank you for joining us today for this important and timely topic on women's legal rights. The American Bar Association is one of the largest voluntary associations of lawyers and judges in the world, and we are proud to organize this event. We are committed to the rule of law, fair legal process, the independence of lawyers, access to justice, an independent judiciary, and respect for human rights for all. The event is organized by the ABA during the 69th session of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women and the NGO CSW Forum. As an official sponsor of the NGO CSW Forum, we extend our gratitude to the forum staff and volunteers for their efforts to convene our global community at the United Nations. We're also deeply grateful for the cooperation of the Bar Issues Commission of the International Bar Association, which I also actually happen to chair and which is committed to fostering the dialogue for the issues we're talking about today. We regularly focus on diversity and inclusion issues. And bars around the world share this same sense of priority that the ABA has fostered. Those are the Law Association for Asia and the Pacific, otherwise known as Law Asia, the Union Internationale des Avocats, the UIA, and the World Justice Project in this event, and amplifying our collective impact. Today, we will delve into a critical discussion on ensuring and accelerating women's legal rights. Our panelists, representing legal organizations and initiatives around the world, will examine key areas that include access to justice for women and girls, eliminating discriminatory laws and policies, ending gender-based violence, and empowering women's leadership in decision-making. This year, as we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Reform for Action, and the 25th anniversary of the United Nations Security Resolution on Women, Peace, and Security, we are reminded of the progress made, but also aware of the work that needs to be done. We appreciate those who responded to our online polls and discussions in the NGO CSW Forum platform. Today, we invite you to engage in this vital conversation through your questions, through the Q&A, and as time permits, we will try to get to as many as we can. But first, I am pleased to present some specially recorded remarks by the ABA President, Mr. William Bay, for this program.
Hello, I'm Bill Bay, President of the American Bar Association. Thank you for joining us for this very important panel discussion included in the 69th session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. In 1995, 30 years ago, at the 4th World Conference on Women, the ABA was part of a historic declaration that established a framework for the advancement of women's rights. We participated in that effort as a global leader in advancing the legal profession, equal justice, human rights, and the rule of law. With a global membership of lawyers, judges, and legal professions, we work to promote inclusive legal and justice systems, protect judicial independence, the independence of the legal profession. We advocate for fair laws, and we enhance public understanding of the core principles of justice, human rights, and democracy through the rule of law. In a word, we work to make justice real in people's lives. The ABA remains unwavering in our commitment to gender equality, women's rights, and women's empowerment. We are dedicated to advancing the ability of women and girls to meaningfully enjoy their human rights and fundamental freedoms, consistent with international human rights laws and obligations. We foster international cooperation in our efforts to eliminate violence against women and girls and to promote women's participation in decision-making. This gathering underscores the significant progress of the past 3 decades in women's rights. But we also know there are ongoing challenges that remain, and the need for accelerated efforts to achieve gender equality and the rights and empowerment of women and girls. The American Bar Association remains committed to supporting implementation of the historic declaration from 30 years ago. We are committed to addressing ongoing and emerging legal and justice challenges faced by women and girls worldwide. Let me thank our panelists and the ABA representatives and observers to the United Nations for their attention to these important issues. We also appreciate the ABA Commission on Women in the Profession and numerous ABA member groups that offer resources and opportunities to advance women's careers and professional development. Most of all, thanks to each of you for attending this important program. By being here and with your ongoing support, you are a valued member of the ABA's community and home for America's legal profession. Through our work together, we can create a more just, equitable, and inclusive world for all. Thank you.
Well, I will virtually thank President Bay for those inspiring remarks. And as you heard, the American Bar Association's dedication to advancing women's legal rights is deeply rooted in our history and continues to drive our work today. In fact, we honor women attorneys' achievements each year with our Margaret Brent Award, named for the first woman lawyer in America who arrived in the colonies in the early 17th century. It is this commitment to action that brings us to today's discussion. We're fortunate to have with us today Amelia Galliano, Daniela Barba, Jacqueline Scott, and Melissa Prang. I will give more detailed information on their bios as we proceed, but I also want to thank our staff person, Sherry Garay, and again recognize Renee Doppler, Deputy UN Representative, who helps me as the ABA's UN representative to foster the mission of the ABA in terms of UN-related matters on behalf of the ABA. So our first speaker is Amelia Galliano. If she could activate her video, she's there. She is a private sector development specialist of the Women, Business, and Law Project. She leads the data quality initiatives and is developing new research to measure the effective implementation of gender-related laws. With a background in community engagement and international political economy, she brings a wealth of working knowledge with the global community of development practitioners and empowering them with practical and localized knowledge. With her experience at the World Bank Group and advanced degrees in international relations, she is leading research to assess the real-world impact of laws that affect women. So Amelia, thank you for being here today, and perhaps you could share with us what you have found in your work with the Women, Business, and Law Project.
Of course, dear Stephen, thank you, and many thanks to all the colleagues at ABA for inviting me this year and for giving me an opportunity to present alongside colleagues from the World Justice Program, from Union Internationale des Avocats, and Law Asia, to share more about the Women, Business, and the Law Project. Our project gives visibility to the legal and policy barriers that women face on the road to economic empowerment around the world. But let me be clear, this is for us at the World Bank, not just about human rights, it's also about economic growth and development. To give you some numbers, achieving gender parity in employment and pay could unlock an average increase of GDP per capita of about 20% across countries. And research by Moody's suggests that OECD countries alone could add $7 trillion to the global economy by closing the gender gap in the labor force and in management. These are staggering numbers, and to achieve these results, we need to first identify where the barriers are, and that's where we come in. So let me tell you how we give visibility to those barriers. We publish a comprehensive data set that spans several topics. For example, women's safety from violence, women's rights in the workplace, women's equal access to financial services, and entrepreneurship opportunities. Our data set is comparable across 190 countries and territories, and we have built it over 50 plus years. This panel data series is the basis of foundational research like the one I mentioned earlier. And going forward, we hope that it will be used by researchers to show the link between women's rights and economic outcomes. Now, what we find when we look at our data, I'll give you two big numbers and one smaller insight. Now, the first big number is that our latest data shows that women only have 2/3 of the legal rights afforded to men, 2/3. Nowhere in the world, according to our data, do women have the same legal rights as measured by our indicators as men. But as you know, and as many of you pointed out in the poll preceding this event, laws on the books are not sufficient to achieve gender equality, and effective implementation is crucial for the realization of rights. We're also measuring this, and it's very hard to measure, but we estimate that only 40% of the implementing mechanisms are in place around the world to ensure that women actually enjoy the rights on the books. And these implementing mechanisms include services, action plans, implementing agencies, and monitoring mechanisms. Now, let me give you a little bit of a smaller example on this specific point of implementing mechanisms. Even though 50% of the countries and territories that we mention mandate equal remuneration for work of equal value as defined by the ILO, fewer than 20% of them, 35, have pay transparency measures or enforcement mechanisms in place to address the gender pay gap. What this means in practice is that women on average earn just 77 cents for every dollar paid to men. Now, how our data has been used in practice to pursue reforms. I'll give you one example. Prior to 2022, in Azerbaijan, women were restricted from working in as many as 674 jobs. These job restrictions, inherited from the former Soviet Union legislation, prevented women from working as train engineers, bus drivers, and other jobs considered potentially hazardous and strenuous. As part of a project to increase female labor force participation rates, the country partnered with the World Bank to identify and lift these restrictions. A new labor code was eventually adopted in 2022, opening up new opportunities for women. And there are many such similar examples that affect family law, and labor law that have these restrictions on women's ability to participate more fully in the economy. Now, what we're working on at the moment, we're about to kickstart our largest data collection effort yet. Over the past year, we have significantly strengthened our methodology and developed new measures in two main areas. We really wanted to expand the number of measures that we look at when we explore the implementation of the law. And here we've added several new indicators that look at national policies and action plans, institutions in charge of monitoring and implementing laws, access to justice measures, government programs and services, and collection and publication of sex disaggregated data. But beyond that, we also want to hear from the experts that we survey every year their perception of the level of enforcement of the law. So this year, we will ask experts practicing law in their respective country about their perception of the level of enforcement. And while this is only an imperfect proxy, we believe it will be a very useful index to measure what we call the enforcement gap. And finally, what you can do. help us make barriers visible. To collect the data, I mentioned that we rely on experts around the globe. We have a database of over 1,600 lawyers, judges, civil society representatives, and public officials in the 190 countries and territories that we cover. And we think that they and you are the best placed to tell us what laws exist in your respective country, how to interpret them, and to what level they're implemented and enforced. So please consider reaching out, sharing your knowledge, or referring us to colleagues who will be best placed and interested to participate in our annual data collection efforts. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have about the project or how you can be involved in it. Thank you again, Stephen.
No, thank you, Amelia. Very, very informative. Next, we will have Daniela Barbara, the Director of Research on Access to Justice at the World Justice Project. Daniela's work focuses on people-centered justice approaches, such as the development of justice measurement tools and research into barriers to quality justice services. With her extensive experience in governance and academic research, including her PhD from Princeton, she brings valuable data-driven perspectives to the discussion today. So Daniela, would you please share with us what you consider the core takeaways of your research?
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Renee, Sherry, for inviting me. Let me just share my screen quickly. Can you see my screen? Yes, perfect. Thank you so much again. So WJP World Justice Project is an organization with offices in DC, Mexico, and Singapore, which seeks to build knowledge, generate awareness, and stimulate action to advance the rule of law. And one of the main areas of work focuses on advancing justice for all. So in seeking to address the question of expanding access to justice for women and girls, I think it would be helpful to introduce or remind the audience about an approach to access to justice that has been increasingly recognized among academics, but also among international organizations and government actors, people-centered justice. People-centered justice is an approach that starts by assessing the legal problems experienced by people, regardless of whether they acknowledge these problems as legal or they seek help from lawyers, courts, or families or friends. This approach is interested in the diverse pathways people may follow in seeking to solve their legal problems, the barriers they find to the help they need, which may include information, assistance and representation, dispute resolution. And we care about whether people solve their problems or not, independently of legal resolutions and agreements, and the hardships they experience as a result of these problems. This approach recognizes that various kinds of actors may support the solution of legal problems, including lawyers and courts, but also legal aid and community organizations or customary and informal institutions. In recognizing these solutions, people-centered justice cares about institutions creating conditions for accountability and the participation of communities and justice actors as stakeholders of justice institutions. And to inform policy design, policies centering around people need a robust data ecosystem that may combine different types of evidence and where legal needs surveys are the gold standard. Legal needs surveys are an unbiased way to assess people's needs, regardless of whether institutions see those needs, institutions or conventional justice actors. So the patterns of gender disparity in access to justice that I'm going to quickly overview today rely on the Global Legal Needs Survey that WJP conducted in more than 100,000 households and in more than 100 countries. So it's asking people directly about their justice needs and their justice experiences. And this data was validated with more than 600 global and country-specific data sources on justice. Some of the main general findings, without disaggregating by gender, are that obviously, perhaps obviously, justice problems are ubiquitous and frequent. Most people do not turn to lawyers or courts. People face several barriers to meet their justice needs, starting by the fact that they don't acknowledge their problem to be legal in nature. And justice problems obviously have negative impacts in people's lives. Now, turning to our findings on gender-based disparities in access to justice, Legal needs surveys start by assessing the prevalence of civil, administrative, and family legal problems. Looking at legal needs surveys for all the countries we surveyed, there doesn't appear to be gender disparity in the prevalence of legal problems, meaning that there's an equal or comparable amount of countries where both men are more likely to experience legal problems or women are more likely to experience legal problems. However, of course, context matters. So we merged the survey data with UNDP's Gender Inequality Index, which measures women's access to education, health, political representation, and participation of women in the labor market. And so then we find that in a majority of countries with low gender inequality, meaning higher or relatively higher empowerment of women, women report experiencing more legal problems than men. However, in 4 out of 5 countries where women are less empowered or there is higher inequality, they experience fewer legal problems than men. Now, why is this? We need to go deeper into the results by type of problem and see that it is a question of women's access to the public sphere of life. In a large majority of the surveyed countries with high gender inequality, women experience fewer problems related to employment, money and debt, and land and property than men. This indicates women's lower level of empowerment and participation in the public sphere. Now, this trend is reversed partially in low gender inequality or relatively higher empowerment countries, where women experience more employment problems in 65% of these countries. So we might expect women's access to labor and voice to increase as societies become more inclusive, and thus for women to experience more problems. As for the prevalence of problems related to land and money and debt, that doesn't seem to be a clear pattern where gender empowerment influences the experience of problems. And this finding needs to be further explored, but it might be that even in relatively less unequal societies, access to credit, land and property is restricted for women. Now, we're not trying to say here that more problems are better, but rather these findings are relevant since they point to a self-reinforcing cycle, particularly in contexts with low gender empowerment or high inequality, where institutions and even population surveys may fail to identify access to justice as a pressing concern for women if they don't take into account the barriers women experience to access entire areas of the public life. This evidence also reinforces the importance of gender empowerment as prevention and integrative approaches to understanding justice needs. Now, a case in point is family legal problems, which include those related to child support, child custody, divorce or separation, threats of intimate partner violence. Family legal problems are more prevalent for women in a large majority of countries, even without taking into account the country-level gender of inequality. This makes sense since family problems occur in the domestic sphere, where women still carry out more activities than men, and where gender disparities may manifest or can manifest more often. This trend is also observed regardless of the country's level of gender inequality. That said, less countries with high inequality here show a gender disparity, which likely reflects an issue of underreporting and legal capability due to lower levels of women's empowerment. This is consistent with our findings on legal vulnerability. If we look at access to official proof of identity, we find that it is associated with gender inequality. In 80% of countries with high gender inequality, more women than men lack official proof of identity. Disparities in documentation of housing and land tenure are observed across the board, regardless of the level of gender inequality. Also across the board, gender patterns manifest in the barriers to justice people experience. WJP has created a measurement of the global justice gap, and we consider that people are in the civil and administrative justice gap when they face significant barriers to the resolution of their problems, unfair, tardy, and costly resolution processes, as well as barriers to crucial justice services such as information or assistance and representation. In 7 out of 10 countries in the survey, women are more likely to be in the justice gap. That said, the higher the societal levels of gender inequality, the more likely women are to experience barriers to justice and have unmet justice needs. Women are also more likely to experience health-related, interpersonal, or economic hardships as a result of their problems. This pattern is observed in more than 6 out of every 10 countries surveyed. Addressing poverty may particularly impact justice outcomes for women in poverty, obviously, as one of the key actions of the Beijing+30 action agenda. I leave these results for you to explore in the report, but we also find wealth-based disparities in access to justice that are impactful. And more recent research we have conducted systematically looks at justice institutions and what are the pain points in justice journeys or the different pathways people follow from the perspective of people, with particular attention to those on vulnerability. We look forward to the opportunity to share those results with you, and thank you again, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Daniela. And we have a couple of questions first on the slides. Some people have asked if they will be available. I'm sure we can make them available if they're not already posted. But one other question, Daniela, which perhaps you might be able to shed light on. The question is, what are the major factors behind violations of women's legal rights in Beijing? I think she means after Beijing, but could you identify or sum up for her that response?
Thank you. I think, in the results I presented, which is what I can speak to with, more like, a larger base of evidence, I think it is related not only to strategies to address directly access to justice, but the broader empowerment context for women. So I think they come together, like the fact that if you look at how women's rights have been advanced more sustainably in certain contexts, it really depends on the ability of women to take like a bottom-up approach and slowly build on those rights, or fight for those rights. This is, for example, the case with reproductive rights, the way they have been a little more resilient in the context of Latin American countries, where it comes from the bottom, from civil society organizations, really long battle to defend these rights, as opposed when these decisions are a little more top-down or come from Supreme Courts only, where they can be taken away a little more easily. I think it's a question of broader societal legal empowerment and participation of women in building those rights that might be crucial.
Thank you very much. And now I'm delighted to welcome my good friend Jacqueline Scott, immediate past president of the UIA, whose membership spans 110 countries. Jackie's extensive experience includes directing the UIA Institute for the Rule of Law and co-directing the UIA Human Rights Commission. As co-founder of Courtney Scott, she has also served on the United Nations Administrative Tribunal, and her distinguished career and international perspective makes her a valuable contributor to our conversation. Jackie, could you please discuss with us the challenges and opportunities you faced as president of an international bar association in this area?
Thank you, Steve, and it is indeed an honor to be here. As Steve says, I was the president of the Union Internationale des Avocats, and we represent lawyers, thousands of them, in 110 countries. So as you can imagine, we have members with varying cultures, religions, ethnic backgrounds. So trying to create a cohesive whole where you can address the issues that are important can often be very challenging. But I think the UIA has done an excellent job. We have a very strong Commission on Women, and we are working always to better the lives and empowerment of women. And what I'd like to do today is just talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities that we are seeing now here in the 25 years into the 21st century. As many of you know, this Beijing Declaration was a groundbreaking global framework for advancing human rights, but particularly for advancing gender equality in all aspects of life. And countries pledged to, quote, revoke any remaining laws that discriminate on the basis of sex. According to a report by Equality Now, 30 years later, not one country has achieved this full legal equality. And what worries me most about all of this is that we are beginning to see, or we are seeing, in many parts of the world, a backlash against women's rights and against women. And I'll speak a little bit about my own country because for really the very first time, women's rights, women's health rights, reproductive rights, and in fact, women's rights generally to work, to have equality, are being questioned. Ever since the reversal of Roe versus Wade, which now has limited severely the right of American women to have an abortion, there has been a stampede, in my view, against women's rights. And unfortunately, the United States has always been a leader in these kinds of areas. And if things go south in the United States, my worry is that other countries, less developed countries, may see the United States view as permission for them to do the same. As we know, the attacks on women and women's rights are not always direct and obvious. It is very disturbing in the United States to hear comments by our vice president, who has indicated that the role of women without children, either because they never had them or because they are now past childbearing years, is one that is limited solely to taking care of children. It's quite a horrifying comment for me to hear. Similarly, we have a new proposed act called the SAVE Act, which is a proposed legislation to ensure the integrity of voting. And under this act, there would be, each person voting would have to produce either a birth certificate or a passport. And unfortunately, most women who take their husband's name do not have a birth certificate that matches their current name. If you have a passport, that would do. But if you don't, and of course, there are many people in the United States and in all countries who don't have a passport, and this is going to severely interrupt the ability of women to vote. Social media, of course, is a huge problem, which gives voice to misogynist groups of men in mainstream conversation. And as we have seen, there are comments about women politicians. For example, I heard someone in the last few months speaking about Kamala Harris's voice and her laugh, as if these were the important elements of her candidacy. But, you know, we never hear those comments about men. So what do we do about this backlash? I think this is where legal organizations and bar associations can be vital. It is up to lawyers and judges to start talking about some of these issues, and bar associations like the UIA, like Law Asia, like the ABA, we can have a significant role in educating. Another challenge that we know exists is the gender-based violence and lack of legal protections for women. While many countries have made strides in addressing gender-based violence, it still remains one of the most persistent violations of women's human rights. And with this backlash against women, it will necessarily have a negative impact on legislative advances for protecting women who are victims of violence. For instance, I believe it's Bolivia and Uruguay have now sought to retract some of the protections that women victims of violence have. Here, I would like to note the activities of the UIA, which have had a very long-term and consistent focus on the rights of women who are victims of violence. And in fact, on International Women's Day, March 8, 2022, the UIA issued its Charter of Fundamental Principles on Access to Justice for Women Victims of Violence, which is basically a roadmap for all of us, but particularly bar associations and lawyers, for ways to address this issue. And this charter has now been signed by numerous bar associations and legal organizations. And it instructs bar associations and lawyers on the things that they can do, including engaging in awareness raising and pro bono representation of women. Another issue that, of course, we face, and this has been touched on, is the discriminatory laws and policies which constrain women's full economic and social participation, trapping millions of women in poverty and economic dependency, and therefore increasing their vulnerability to mistreatment. This is particularly noted in the workplace, where, as Amelia told us, women earn 77 cents for every dollar, or 77.77 euros for every euro. And despite progress, the gender pay gap persists. Women continue to face workplace discrimination, harassment, and barriers to advancement. And this underrepresentation of women in leadership roles is particularly noted in law, business, and politics, and it continues to limit the influence of women over decision-making processes that affect their legal rights. What to do about this? I think here we have to work on enforcing equal pay legislation. In the United States, we have the Equal Pay Act, which does protect women, but the problem is that at higher levels, it is very difficult to prove the factors that are necessary to show, because when you get to, it has to be equal pay for equal work. The jobs have to be substantially the same in various ways. And as you get higher up in the work chain, it is much more difficult. I think there's perhaps less disparity among blue-collar workers where the pay levels are either union-driven or transparent. So I think for those of us in the professions, it's much harder. Another solution that I think we all need to think about is the provision of affordable childcare. And here I would note the Bordeaux Bar Association, which has implemented a very successful childcare for lawyers as part of the bar membership. So I think this is one area that we all need to focus on, and there has to be more of that. Finally, I think access to justice, access to education, as Daniela has told us, access to justice is very disparate for women. There are still many, many women who, one, don't even know their rights. Two, as we have just heard, they don't bring their claims forward, whether it's for cultural or religious reasons, fear of retribution. There is a huge barrier for women to access the justice system. And I think this is where lawyers and bar associations can really make a difference, trying to help women protect their legal rights. I'll be very quick to finish. There are, of course, as we see, these many challenges, but there are some opportunities which have presented themselves in the context of AI. The rise of digital technologies has the potential to greatly enhance access to legal resources and support systems for women, especially in underserved areas. For instance, virtual legal consultations, online platforms for reporting abuse, and AI-driven legal tools can make it easier for women to access justice and legal advice. Global movements for gender equality are very powerful. Global movements such as Me Too, Time's Up, and others have raised awareness of the issues of sexual harassment, discrimination, and gender-based violence. I'm sure all of you have read about the French woman Giselle Pellicot, who bravely went public with the issue of her husband hiring men to have sex with her while she was drugged. These are the kinds of things that we all need to engage in. This concerted engagement is most effective. I think my time is up, so I'll stop there. I think we have come a long way, but I think at this moment, particularly with the backlash that we are seeing across the world, it is essential to remain vigilant in addressing the challenges that will hinder our progress. And with that, I will turn it back over to Steve.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And we did have a question pertinent to the access to justice issue. You've answered quite a bit of it. I will simply note two other comments that the questioner made, saying a solution to disparity might be apprenticeships for more lawyers and funding for legal aid. And if equity is the problem, then perhaps raising and targeting the definition of what gives us equity, apprenticeships, technology. You mentioned innovation, legal aid. And she said she was thinking in terms of how to find solutions to the bottlenecks. I don't know if you have any particular comment to add to that.
I think all of those are essential. We as I always feel that we as lawyers and bar associations, we need to lead by example. One, having women leaders. At the UIA, we did not have a woman for the first 90 years, but now we've had 3 women, and I think we have broken the logjam, and I think we will move into the future with women having equal opportunity to lead organizations. I also think we need to, as lawyers, for instance, we need to engage in pro bono activities. We have special skills and knowledge, uniquely ours, where we can represent women and defend their rights. And I think each of us has to take on that responsibility to engage in action, things that we can do, representing people pro bono. Those are things bar associations can do on a collective basis by having a platform where women can come with problems and have lawyers available to answer them.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn now to Melissa Pang. Apologies for mispronouncing your name the first time, who is a past president of Law Asia and a trailblazer as the first female president of the Law Society of Hong Kong. Her establishment of key committees focused on international legal affairs, pro bono, and diversity all underscore her commitment to advancing the legal profession. Recognized by the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region government for her public service, she brings legal qualifications and experience from multiple jurisdictions, including Australia, England, and Wales. Melissa, perhaps you could talk about empowering women and inclusion in legal and justice sectors.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here representing Law Asia. And actually, as you mentioned, I'm based in Hong Kong, and I only got back from Beijing yesterday. So the Beijing Declaration was signed by 189 governments in 1995. Many have put in enormous effort and dedication in the pursuit of equality, development, and peace for all women everywhere in the interest of humanity. I think we always have to reaffirm women's rights and gender equality. They are all basic human rights. Let me give you a brief introduction of Law Asia. Law Asia is the regional law association of lawyers, judges, jurists, and legal organizations. We represent and advocate for the interest of the legal profession in the Asia-Pacific region. Our members are over 50 leading bar associations and leading organizations. They span across over 40 jurisdictions in Asia and the Pacific region. Core value is the adherence to the principles of the rule of law, access to justice, and the protection of human rights. Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings. It is our core value and duty to uphold equity, dignity, and freedoms. Today, fellow speakers have focused on expanding access to justice for women, eliminating discriminatory laws and policy, and ending gender-based violence. I would like to focus more on empowering women's inclusion in the legal and justice sectors. All bar associations play high importance on the values of inclusivity and equality, and we all encourage our members to do the same. I would like to say for the judiciary, judicial diversity is also a very important factor. In a diverse society, people will expect the judiciary to be roughly reflective of the population as a whole, as to be indicative of fairness. Let me take the case of Hong Kong. Our solicitor profession has always adopted our open door policy. We embrace diversity and even welcome legal talent from other jurisdictions to join the legal service sector in Hong Kong. For the judiciary in Hong Kong, in addition to the local judges appointed to the court, Hong Kong is fortunate that we can appoint judges from other common law jurisdictions of the highest caliber. However, for gender diversity, there seems to be much room for improvements. As a matter of fact, it's observed that for the legal profession and the judiciary in Hong Kong, a striking diversity deficiency is gender imbalance. Let me give you some data. As of February this year, in the judiciary in Hong Kong, female judges represent only 35% of the total number of judges in Hong Kong. And for the legal profession, solicitor branch, the proportion of women varies at different stages in their career path in a law firm. When you talk about the new entrants, more than half of them are female. But when you look at the senior level, only 1/3 is female. And in places like Hong Kong, where the judiciary, the member of the judiciary are mostly selected from the legal profession. A gender diversity deficiency at the top of the legal profession will almost inevitably lead to a gender diversity deficiency in the judiciary. What are the reasons behind? It could be unconscious bias preventing women from being promoted. And we can also see there's a lot of female lawyers dropping out along the way, leading to talent loss. And there's a lack of flexible working arrangement for women to cope with work and family responsibility at the same time. Certainly, more can be done. As the first female president of the Law Society of Hong Kong, I'm very committed to encourage a culture of gender diversity and inclusion. And we're looking at, or they're conducting survey, because we need to be more scientific to look at the figures, to review the status of diversity and inclusion. Providing more mandatory CPD, continuous professional development courses, to raise awareness of the legal profession. and to promote the importance and benefit to have gender diversity and inclusion policy in law firms. We have to set standard. To develop gender diversity and inclusion standard so that law firms can have benchmark to measure how their practice, policy, and procedures are positioned. And also people need to have self-assessment tools. At least they have to be able to identify which area in the law's operation they need improvement. And more mentoring and sponsorship program for female solicitors, lawyers. And we have to increase the visibility of leading women lawyers in this industry. So we are encouraging law firms to have more flexible arrangement and workshops and seminars and lectures so that people be aware of the effect of unconscious bias. Let me share some, because just a few months ago, we have a roundtable discussion among female leaders from different jurisdictions. We have invited female presidents from England and Wales, Malaysia, Poland, Singapore, and also former Solicitor General of India. Let me share some of their comments. From England and Wales, they said, it has always been a male-orientated route to promotion and traditional network. And work-life balance is not friendly, especially for women. And we can see in England and Wales, they've undertaken a lot of global research involving over 15,000 lawyers around the world to study the topic of promotion of women to leadership position. And let me also share the position in India. It was said women were a minority in the litigation field in India. There is a vicious cycle where women are not promoted to leadership role in the legal industry because leadership positions are currently dominated by men. Stereotyping is aggravating the problem of gender inequality in the country. And it also commented and mentioned that they are now doing like gender sensitization training to all support staff in courts and persons who are in a position to appoint or promote candidates or employees. A very interesting part is about, they're talking about transparency because of the pay gap difference. In India, they are advocating that for mandatory disclosure of salary so that to promote transparency and accountability with their wage gap. Because if we don't have the information, concrete information and scientific one, it's very difficult to pinpoint how serious is the problem of the wage gap. Also, it's very encouraging to know that the Indian Supreme Court has released its in 2023 handbook on combating gender stereotypes to ensure the language used in court proceedings are inclusive and they're checking unconscious bias. And there's several courts around India. They have taken on the initiative to build daycares within the court buildings that can promote the ease of access to work for mothers. And for Malaysia, it was shared that in Malaysia, there's a lack of understanding by the top tier management, which is currently dominating by men, and there's under recognition of the effort of women leaders and the lack of formal reward made it difficult for women to advance. So continuous advocacy to promote women in leadership position is needed. Let's go to Poland. The Poland Division of Women in Law published a report in 2022 some highlights. They say out of 600 female respondents, only 85% have 85% of those 600 female respondents in the report experience being belittled because of their gender. And in the top 100 firms in Poland, only 6 are managed by women. And 50% of the respondents have problems balancing work and childcare. So you can see the issue in Poland. And the last one I would like to have the sharing is about Singapore. The Singapore now president last year mentioned about in Singapore, while there's a need of balancing gender empowerment in legal workplace, employers should also be mindful of the risk of falling into the trap of reverse discrimination. So it's highly recommended to adopt a merit-based approach in Singapore society and governance, especially in education, government policy, and civil servant recruitment. So going forward, it's great that we are seeing more competent female lawyers being given the opportunity to join the top tiers of the legal profession and the judiciary. Empowering women's inclusion in the legal and justice sectors and also the legislative sectors is very important. This can facilitate access to justice for women and eliminate discriminatory law and policy. It's very important that we have to voice out loudly and put in action in a united manner to realize the vision of the Beijing Declaration. Gender diversity is a core value that we hold dearly in our heart, and we have to ensure they're deep in the culture and values of all community. So thanks so much for the time.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Before moving on to the next segment, I want to raise one question that's in the Q&A and then turn back to the entire panel for any responses or additions that you'd like to make. The question that's been posed is there a law that can be applied immediately when this woman and child are tortured, persecuted, murdered, or even raped, because women are synonymous with something gentle and weaker than others? Thanks. Before turning to the panel, I would note that the American Bar Association did pass a resolution that makes it ABA policy in terms of the pending draft convention on crimes against humanity. That proposed draft convention renders apartheid as a crime against humanity. Our resolution that I was deeply involved with was to render the definition of apartheid to include gender apartheid as well, so that the types of activities that are articulated in the question would be part of that crime against humanity, within the other definitions. So that gives us ABA policy that enables a lobbying effort, if you will, with the State Department in terms of that. But I'll turn it back to the panel if they want to comment more generally or specifically on the question.
Steve?
Yes.
I'll just make a note that the UIA's Charter of Fundamental Principles on Access to Justice for Women Victims of Violence really addresses this and proposes that women, which is defined as not only adult women, but women of all ages, as well as girls under 18 years of age. And in Article 5, it states that violence against women shall be considered a criminal offense. Rape and other forms of sexual abuse can constitute international crimes such as war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. So it is something that we need to work towards, that these kinds of violent crimes against women must be considered on the same level as war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide.
Thank you, Jackie. And that's part of the purpose of this convention that's being proposed, is to fill a gap outside of the areas that are covered. I'd like to ask the panel, with regard to any of the questions that were raised or responses that you heard, if there's anything you'd like to add before we move on. Daniela, I think you had a comment.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. So yes, it's regarding this question that was posed after, I think, Jackaline's presentation, in terms of the possible bottlenecks to justice and possible measures that would expand access to justice. And I think that in addition to what was answered, or like what was included in the answer, I think a key issue is really working with the grain, looking at the solutions that people are already finding on the ground to their legal problems, like all those solutions that never really need a lawyer, make it to a lawyer, and take more like a preventative approach in the sense of empowering people so that legal problems are not as frequent, but also empowering people in the sense of having legal problems that do not escalate to the extent that they need legal aid and access to a court, but that can solve in earlier stages so that they don't become an issue for lawyers. I think that would be also important. Thank you, Stephen.
Danielle, I believe that is, in fact, prevention is the best solution. And that's, I think, an area that we probably don't focus on as much. We focus on the solution to the problem, but in the sense of after the fact. And I think that's a very, very important point. We need to look at the source and stop it before it becomes a problem.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add further?
Oh,
Melissa?
I have to make a comment, because I looked at this very important topic. However, I think it's very important to involve the support of the male counterparts, because it's not a topic just we should talk among the women, because actually, in reality, in many jurisdictions, or member jurisdictions, we need to raise the awareness, not to the general public, and also to all the legal profession, especially the male lawyers, the male judges. It's important for them to discuss this topic. Otherwise, this does not come in a top priority. And if in these days and ages, there's so many people are very busy. If the more we raise the awareness, this will be high up on the priority so that people can address the issue. And also, in Hong Kong, whenever there's any law and policy, whenever they go through the government, go through the legislative council, they have to consider what's the impact on gender. I think this is a question we always have to put on the checklist to consider whatever we do, what is the impact? This is a matter of unconsciously, we have to be aware of this. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for that comment. And frankly, that's one of the reasons I'm here, was to emphasize your point. I am the American Bar Association's representative to the United Nations, and I specifically said to Renee, I would like to participate in one of the CSW programs to make the point that you've just made and establish it, not just as a priority of our UN representatives group, but of the ABA as a whole. So in terms of what we've been talking about, though, are there lessons that we can learn from the successful initiatives in certain countries that have effectively advanced human rights? We've talked about what we've achieved and how far we need to go, but are there particular examples that any of you would like to call to our attention where you sit back and say, that was good?
I can share.
Yes, go ahead, Amelia.
Please go ahead.
All right. I can share an example. So a few years ago, we embarked on a research in Kenya of reforms, and we looked specifically at the adoption of a historical landmark, Protection Against Domestic Violence Act, which was passed in 2015. And in this case, it was the concerted effort of private sector and civil society organizations together with lawmakers that brought about this this change. And I'm highlighting here because I think this showcases how also bar associations and law firms through their pro bono work can help influence legal change and affect this prevention aspect in some cases. This is more about lawmaking. Um, and even though it was a landmark reform, there was an issue with it. So it was the result of years of advocacy from civil society and committed members of parliaments, and it addressed family violence in Kenya for the first time, establishing best practices alongside or including reporting mechanisms and protections for victims. But it had a big problem. The legislation lacked comprehensive rules of procedure. And these were left by legislators to be defined at a later stage. They could agree on the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act, but not on the rules of procedure, on how to actually implement and enforce the act. So this omission left a gap in implementation and enforcement for 5 years until the Chief Justice finally adopted the rules of procedure in 2020. So on the one hand, this example highlights what can be achieved when there is concerted effort, when there is a push through civil society, through private sector, together with the lawmakers, but it also highlights how important it is to ensure that the laws don't just stay on the books, but there is implementing regulations and other implementing mechanisms to actually make them reality, to assign the budget to the protections for victims and establish the services that support victims of violence, to establish reporting mechanisms. I hope this helps. Thank you.
No, that was very good. Thank you very much. It led to another question that I was going to ask, and maybe you have just answered it. And the question was, though, are laws enough? We can continue to pass laws, but we've heard about bottlenecks. We've heard about the need for effective implementation. What you've given an example. I mean, is this a role for the organized bar then to really provide the voice? Who else should we be looking to engage and involve? How do you implement where you already have laws on the books that are not doing the job?
I can share if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you. So the example I was thinking about is Alaska Services Corporation and the way they have really taken like an asset mindset. That's the way their founder would describe it, in the sense of Alaska's a state that doesn't have that many lawyers. And so for people to access the legal help that the legal aid they need, it was very difficult until there was like this initiative to really see what community services were already available throughout the Alaskan territory, and try to understand, okay, how can we connect different services so that we can provide legal aid maybe through organizations that provide other services already on the ground. And this Alaska Services Corporation has had great impact in precisely addressing gender-based violence. It has a really high rate of gender-based violence, of the intimate partner violence, Alaska. And through connecting different services, they have, they provided free justice services and legal help for people to actually make laws that are, in paper, effective.
Yeah.
Thank you. Melissa?
Yeah, just make a passing comment. First, I think I can see a worldwide trend of government-funded legal aid is decreasing because of the difficulty in the economies. And I can see that in many jurisdictions, we have to encourage more lawyers to undertake pro bono work, because this is our duty. This is why we become lawyers. And it's so important to the community. We can't just rely on the government-funded legal aid to do the work. And the second point I would like to make is about, for example, domestic violence. I mean, the law is there. However, when you talk about implementation, we can see many cases when domestic violence happen, they call the police. And sometimes the police attitude make a big difference. They don't take it seriously. But now the policy has changed in Hong Kong, okay? Now they have guidelines and make sure a police must take it seriously and have it all reported and follow up. Otherwise, like you can see the black letter law is there. But when you're actually on the implementation stage, then people might just mellow down the situation, and it would lead to very serious consequences in certain cases. Yeah. Okay, that's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me go to some of the questions that have come from the audience, since we've already covered a lot of my prepared questions for you in this section. So one question is, this person says, I feel that applying the law is by persons, so how can we give the trying to feel the violation is there, not just the fault of the women? I think what she is getting at is more of a societal responsibility, perhaps. Can someone respond to that?
Steve, I'll start. The issues for women are not just women's issues. And as Melissa made a very important point, and as you noted, we need men to take on this responsibility. And I think that is going to be essential. We have got to have participation and buy-in from men. Men have daughters and sisters and mothers and wives, and they need to understand that when the rights of women are violated, it is bad for everything and everyone. And I really think we somehow need to invite men to the party. And I think one of the problems is men are not necessarily really aware of the issues. And a very quick example of this, I just watched a little video clip. And the point of the video clip was to ask men the questions that women are asked in a job interview. And it's a bit amusing, but it's really telling. And there were questions, I mean, that women repeatedly get asked. But they flipped them around to ask men. And one of the questions was, do you think you got this job because you are a man? And of course, the men were a little nonplussed by this, but the best and most effective question was, what do you do to make sure, how do you manage to be assertive, but not perceived as aggressive or bitchy? And this just threw the men really over the edge. They were stunned, and they said, do people really ask that question? And one guy said, I don't even know how to answer that. It's just never been even, it's absurd. And another person indicated that these were horrible questions for a woman to have to answer. And he said, when I was asked the questions, I felt it in my body. I was stressed because of it. So it's a very simple example. Men need to understand some of these nuances, and we haven't done a very good job, maybe, of sharing that.
Well, that's interesting. This leads to one of the questions I was going to ask was about how can international cooperation be used to strengthen women's legal rights? But we have a question from the audience. Can we create model laws and share best practices for equality for women across a number of countries? And I guess the point is, following up on what you've said, Jackie, short of laws and even short of organized bar activity, what can individuals do? What can we do to share best practices, toolkits, other types of things? Thoughts from the speakers would be welcome on how we can actually implement, short of legislation and even short of organized bar activity?
Again, I'll start. I think, as Melissa said, each of us as lawyers has a responsibility. We can be agents of change, and we need to do it. We can mentor young lawyers. We can mentor young men lawyers, and basically educate them about the issues that women will face. Each person can make a difference, but you have to engage. You have to commit to do something. And even if it's a tiny something, you move the ball forward step by step.
Thank you. We have in the comments certain observations from people about South Africa or other approaches. One person has suggested mobile courts, for example. To keep us moving, if people want to answer those in the chat directly, the Q&A, we can do it, but I just want to note those are there. There are more observations, I think, than particular questions. I'd like to move to our concluding part, which is to give each speaker 2 minutes to tell us what message you would like to leave with regard to our audience today, whether it's particular action, what gives you hope, what gives you despair, what the priorities would be. Build on what you've said and see if you can summarize it in 2 minutes for your actual message. I'll start with Amelia. Why don't you go first?
I'll try my best. I wanna start by echoing what Melissa and Jacqueline shared. I think what we can do on an individual level, but also more on a systemic level, is addressing bias and calling out bias and reminding colleagues that sometimes there are behaviors that are discriminatory, and we can see things in a different way if we're just a little bit more aware of what is happening around us. And this has to do also with access to justice. So the example that Jacqueline and Melissa also mentioned about police and domestic violence. So reporting domestic violence issue and assault is difficult if you believe the police will not believe you. So we have to start by raising awareness and educating also our enforcement arms and the judiciary system about the gender bias that may be invisible to them, but is there and is also a barrier to access to justice. And then building on this, I think the two main issues that I want to echo that Jacqueline mentioned are gender-based violence and childcare. I think our study shows that the biggest gap in legislation is around laws that address gender-based violence, laws and policies and services implementing mechanisms that address gender-based violence and that support victims of violence. Only about 30% of the needed laws and supporting mechanisms are in place in this area. And then the other aspect that I want to echo that Jacqueline mentioned is childcare. There again, we see a huge gap in the legislation and also in the supporting services. So not only do countries not establish legislation around the availability, affordability, and quality, especially of early-based childcare services, center-based early childcare services, but also there is a lack of these services then in practice. There is a gap between when maternity leave ends and when the actual childcare and school age services start for children. And then finally, what gives me hope is us, is everyone who is still committed to doing this work. I don't think we're going anywhere. We're not be discouraged. So I'll put again a shameless plug here to encourage you all to consider becoming one of our experts, providing your very valuable knowledge about the laws that apply in your respective countries and the barriers to enforcement, to implementation, or to women, legal barriers to women. And I also want to encourage you, reflecting again what others said, take leadership in your profession, mentor others, or take leadership in other civic spaces. Research actually shows that more women in political leadership is correlated with more gender equal laws, which is not a surprising result, but we do we do have to say it out loud, I guess.
Thank you very much, Amelia. Daniela?
Thank you so much, and thank you again for sharing like your brilliant ideas with us. I think that I do get hope from what is already occurring on the ground, and I think that my whole the whole idea of people-centered justice and really understanding the solutions that people are finding already to their legal problems on the ground, regardless of whether they access lawyers or not, are worth considering. This is something that has been addressed and is already being an objective of international coalitions, as the Justice Action Coalition, integrated by international organizations, including the OECD, UNDP, different nonprofit organizations such as the World Justice Project, and even country governments that sign up to the commitments of the Justice Action Coalition, which include exactly this, like trying to address people's legal problems by looking at what is already occurring in the ground. And that relies on data, on systematic, standardized data and evidence on what solutions, how justice systems are working, justice systems understood broadly, not only the conventional justice actors, courts, lawyers, police, but also other organizations that are a little less thought of as justice actors, such as community organizations, the degree to which they can already provide justice solutions, even when there's not a lawyer in place. So I think that understanding systematically and opening up justice institutions for accountability through really careful evaluation will help us improve these justice institutions and really address people's needs. So yeah, that is what I'm really hopeful about. Individually, I also agree that really mentorship does have a particular space in terms of trying to promote gender equality. And I do see that signaling from the top is one of the main, and it's also in research, education might not be sometimes as effective like this. According to research, diversity, equality, and inclusion programs do not necessarily always get to their objective, but signaling from the top, from leadership, can be an effective means to promote gender equality, and that requires representation of women in leadership. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Jackie, concluding 2-minute thoughts?
Recently spoke to a group of young lawyers in Serbia, and after the discussion, a young woman came up to me and said, if you could give advice to yourself as a young lawyer, what would it be? And my answer to her is the same message that I'd like to leave you all with, and that is engagement. I really think that is necessary. We all need to engage, both individually and collectively. We cannot sit by and hope that somebody else will fix problems that we face. So engagement to me is essential. Join a group of people that can do something. Join bar associations like the ABA, the UIA, Law Asia. Join to work together on these problems. Work for getting out the vote, or work in some of the groups that, for instance, Daniela and Amelia talked about, where you're working to address some of the implementation issues. And on a personal level, on an individual level, if you engage with relatives and friends, we need to talk about the issues that we face. And I think it's really important to engage the men. And what gives me hope, because I'm not as optimistic as Amelia on these matters, is my son and his peers. They are young men who grew up with mothers who had careers, and I am hopeful that they will catapult us further into a world of equality.
Thank you very much. Melissa, concluding comments?
Thank you. I think I have 2 points to make. First, as a lawyer, I remember just 10 days ago, I attended a human rights conference in Nepal. So people are asking me, why do you attend? Are you a human rights lawyer? Then I'm thinking of, we are all lawyers. If we are lawyer, we are all having the pursuit of equity, dignity, and freedoms. So it does not matter whether you are a very specialized human rights lawyer, or you're in corporate, in family law, whether you're in employment law. This is a core value. And gender equality is the basic human rights. So we have to make sure, tell people this is what we are doing. And then everyone is a stakeholder. So I think raising awareness, having pledge, having awareness campaign, supporting policy and law, this is all great. I think we are heading for the right direction. The second point, in brief, I would like to say is about general community, everyone in the community. You're talking about, okay, law is maybe somehow too difficult for that, too complicated. But then you talk about core values of human beings. You talk about love and care. You talk about respect. You talk about empathy. They are core values. I think it just exists in every society. But if they got the core values right through education and the upbringing, they know how to respect people. You step into people's shoes, how it feels. Just like all the example we have about gender inequality. Put men in that position, how would they feel? So I think there's a lot we can do. We are heading for the right direction, and step by step, everyone doing their own little bit can make the world a better place. Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much. And today's discussion has underscored the strides that have been made, but also accentuated the steps that still need to be taken. And we need to remember, as has been said, that this burden does not fall just on women. It's the responsibility of all of us to assert legal rights for women. And remember that we're talking fundamentally about human rights. So let's leave today not only inspired, but also committed to action. And you've heard some comments on how individually we can all make a difference. I want to extend our grateful thanks to all of our speakers here, Melissa, Jackie, Amelia, Daniela. And I also want to thank our staff director, Sherry Garay, and also Renee Doplick, the Deputy UN Representative, for all the work they've done to organize the panel. To learn more about the American Bar Association, you can visit our website for the Center for Global Programming, and also the United Nations Representatives and Observers website to learn more about us. And we also invite you to connect with our ABA delegates at CSW 69 on the NGO CSW forum sponsor page, where you can chat, email us, or otherwise schedule to meet with us. Once again, thank you all very much, and thanks again to our panel.